But the tunic was seamless, woven in one piece from the top down. So they said to one another, let's not tear it, but cast lots for it to see whose it would be.
As I remember it, I was talking with Malcolm Muggeridge. He had just done a book on Mother Teresa, and I had been working with her. And he was very anti-abortion and was rediscovering Jesus. So we began to talk about all violence. And so I mentioned to him that as followers of Jesus, we couldn't countenance war. And he said, oh no, he said, you must defend your country. And I said, well, the same goes for capital punishment. If you're against taking life, the life of the unborn or the life of the born, it all goes together. And he said, oh no, he couldn't see that at all. And he's a great wordsmith. And somehow perhaps I was inspired by him, and I said, you know, Malcolm, the protection of life is a seamless garment. You can't take some life and not others. And that's the first time it came into my mind. It was early in '71.
We are committed to the protection of life, which is threatened in today's world by war, abortion, poverty, the arms race, the death penalty, and euthanasia. We believe that these issues are linked under a consistent ethic of life.
I could never stand pictures of people who were victims of violence. I still can't stand it on the news or on a movie. And I saw bodies being shipped back from Vietnam in body bags, and I could only think garbage bags. People are being treated like garbage.
Disability rights groups see ahead, as do I, all kinds of disabled people who can't speak for themselves being killed because they cost too much. They might live another 30 years. They don't contribute to society. As the Germans used to say, they are useless eaters. Now, a society that thinks in terms of useless eaters, or that it's too expensive to keep somebody alive, is a society that's going to slide deeper and deeper into this quicksand of death.
But up till just fairly recently, 1985, was when I started actually thinking about the death penalty as a human rights issue. As a life issue, very similar to the issue of abortion, and in a larger sense, the issue of nuclear war.
This perhaps may be the most critical moment in history, where we have the capacity to destroy the entire planet and all life in all its forms, and we're still not out of the woods yet. These next 5 to 10 years are critical.
The Seamless Garment Network is a bold new movement which cuts across ideological and religious lines, connecting issues on the basis of whether life is respected, held in reverence, uplifted. Liberals and conservatives, Catholics, evangelicals, and Buddhists, among others, can be found in the more than 70 organizations supporting this new approach to an angry and confused world.
Well, I had been involved in the anti-nuclear movement for several years and was going around doing meetings in people's homes talking about the nuclear hazard. You could call them atomic Tupperware parties. And it was at one of these meetings where a woman stood up and said, well, we know where you stand on nuclear weapons and nuclear radiation. Where do you stand on abortion? I was taken aback. I said, well, this meeting is not about that. I don't know. I guess I'm not for it, but on the other hand, a lot of people seem to need it or want it. And she challenged me. She said, if you are so concerned about babies and children being injured by environmental hazards and toxic materials and war, even by accident, how can you not be concerned about children being killed deliberately by abortion? That stopped me, and it made me think my way through.
I was basically committed at that point in the 80s, in 1985, to a philosophy of a consistent ethic, basically, of protecting life the life of the unborn, the life of our planet, from the point of view of nuclear warfare and warfare in general, actually. Now, the death penalty was the final step for me. I really thought that the death penalty was an authentic response of justice to atrocious crimes, a part of retribution, so to speak. The central process in rejecting that was actually education, just to recognize reality, to research it. And when the Seamless Garment Network, which at that time was for me Peaceful Solutions in Chicago, when they started exploring those issues, exploring alternatives to the death penalty, that was pretty a difficult transition for me because I was fairly committed to the death penalty at that time. There are realities of the death penalty in the United States and around the world that shake you up to the point that you see that doesn't have anything to do with retribution. It doesn't have anything to do with justice. It has to do with the destruction of defenseless life.
For me, I've always been concerned about all these issues of life, and but in 1982, I went by myself to Israel. I was going to go on a private prayer pilgrimage to visit the Holy Land, and I did, and it was very beautiful. But I was up by myself walking through Galilee and reflecting on the Beatitudes and the call to be peacemakers, and I was thinking, this is really beautiful, and I really want to be a part of it, but do I really need to be a part of it? And out of the sky, all these jets came swooping out of the sky, breaking the sound barrier over the Sea of Galilee, shaking the ground because of the sonic booms. And they flew on over me about a mile or two and started dropping the bombs on Lebanon. It was Israeli jets. And, you know, I was in Galilee in the land of the peacemaker, and it was war. And I decided then and there, I'm going to dedicate myself to peace and to life and justice, which is exactly what the Seamless Garment is about.
And then I went to Calcutta, and I saw that Mother Teresa was in a city that was scourged with the presence of 1 million refugees. There were lepers. There were people dying on the sidewalks through no one's fault. No city could have absorbed them. And she worked to keep the spark of life going in the most threatened, the most abject, the throwaway people of her city. And I said to her, Mother, how can you do this every day? Because I was in the home for the dying, and they were covered with spittle and the filth of the gutter. They were born in the gutter. They were living in the gutter. I said, how do you do it every day? And she said, well, it's one by one. To me, each one is Jesus in a distressing disguise. So if you see Jesus in the distressing disguise of the most abject, the most throwaway cases of humanity, then you can see him in every person. Now, Dorothy Day saw Jesus in the most distressing disguise of all, which is the disguise of the enemy, because the enemy is depersonalized, dehumanized, and is painted as a target for our ultimate violence. So I came to it in all of those ways, but I can see how people arrive at the same point by other routes.
We must never treat other human beings as though they were beyond repentance and reconciliation.
It was when I first wrote about my pro-life position in the Village Voice, and I'm probably the only pro-life person here, including all the floors of the building. That led to a certain amount of acerbity. 3 women editors stopped speaking to me, and 2 of them held out for a long time. I think one still doesn't speak to me, which is not altogether a loss. Other people were just astonished. You know, how can I break the mold of somebody on the left? My wife to this day, gets so angry at me. She's more pro-abortion than Molly Yard. That from time to time, she says, I'm not speaking to you anymore. But then she'll read something else I've written on pro-life, and she has to speak at me, yell at me, to say what she thinks.
The abortion issue was not something that was part of my agenda until I personally experienced what a lot of people experience when they have an unplanned pregnancy. Before that, I had counseled multiple people as a medical student. I had done a project on abortion research, and basically I felt pretty comfortable to make a choice on that. Ironically, when my time came, I was pretty firm that I was entitled to have my baby. That was going to be my choice, and the lack of support for that pregnancy and in our society, I guess that applies to everyone, not my specific point, but that was what really opened my eyes to what politically and economically abortion really does to people. And I guess that's how I got into Pro-Lifers for Survival, and later Peaceful Solutions of Chicago, which was the Chicago chapter, and that movement was what begot the Seamless Garment Network.
Coming out publicly for life, that means against death penalty, abortion, the nuclear arms race, war. Some friends have been very, very responsive and supportive and glad, and have learned a little bit more, and are coming onto the bandwagon, so to speak. And others who would be supportive on one of the issues and against another one, they don't know how to respond. Some are mad at me. Some are confused. My family doesn't know what to make of me, I think, because so few people are holding this kind of stand in our country. It's either all pro-life or all anti-nuclear weapons, or all, something like that. And this is such a rare stand. So it's brought some division, but I can live with that. It's the least that I can do is to try to take this stand for what I see as right.
If we become insensitive to the beginning of life and condone abortion, or if we become careless about the end of life and justify euthanasia, we have no reason to believe that there will be much respect for life in between.
To me, the thing that is most attractive is that it takes the fire out of people that say that you cannot address one problem in the world without addressing every single problem of being a human being. The Seamless Garment, in fact, says, well, yes, you can. I mean, you can start by exploring alternatives to some of the most hideous forms of violence, the most unforgivable forms of violence. And here's how you do it. And they don't quibble about where you are politically, where you are religiously, what your life is like in terms of whatever you may be doing otherwise. They deal specifically with life issues and where your politics are. I mean, I think my politics are probably different from a lot of pro-lifers, and my pro-life positions are different from a lot of people who are in human rights work. And Seamless Garment goes above that, far beyond that, and that's what personally has brought me to it, because consistency makes for a certain balance in your life, and what we're looking for is consistency and nonviolence.
Even on an ecological level, whatever happens to the air and the water and the soil and the food crops affects wildlife and affects us and affects our children down into generations in the future. But it's also connectedness on the spiritual level, that we thrive. When we thrive, we all thrive together. And when we start cutting ourselves to pieces, cutting out children, cutting out the unborn, cutting out women, cutting out the handicapped, or even cutting out the criminal, the physically deformed or the morally deformed. We're cutting ourselves apart.
Well, the way I kind of look at the world is that we're all addicted to violence and to death, from abortion to the nuclear arms race and all the myriad forms of death in between, including capital punishment and war and the death of institutionalized violence, which is poverty. The seamless garment tries to look at them all and say they're all related, it's all an affliction of death on humanity, and we're supposed to be for life and for the love of life. And so I really wanted to be a part of that, because that's what it means to be a human being, to be for life.
And for the first time, I really began to look into not so much the pro-life argument as to the biological argument. Now, I'm an atheist, so any theological argument has no weight with me. But it became very clear that once you have implantation, it's not a zebra, this is a human being, or at least a developing human being, or the preborn, or the unborn, whatever you want to call it. If you cut off his or her life at any point past them, then you're killing a developing human being. It seems to me as clear as day.
The seamless garment is against warfare and nuclear warfare and the expenditures for nuclear warfare. And there are some Christian leaders who say that the nuclear and war threat is something in the future. We don't have to really condemn it or deal with it right now, whereas abortion is every day. So they sort of chop up the seamless garment, and they still say, well, we have a consistent ethic of life, but the consistent ethic of life veers chiefly towards anti-abortion and not to anti-war, anti-nuclear war, and to the massive and obscene expenditures for war and weaponry, these expenditures making it impossible for us to meet the needs of the poorest of the poor.
Every human person, no matter how vulnerable or helpless, no matter how young or how old, no matter how healthy, handicapped, or sick, no matter how useful or productive for society, is a being of inestimable worth created in the image and likeness of God.
I believe that we really need radical social change in the United States, probably elsewhere as well. But radical social change cannot be accomplished by liberal groups. It also can't be accomplished by conservative groups. It can only be accomplished when people say, life is worth more, life can be more, and we can work together. In other words, you have to gather allies from all over the political spectrum, and allies who aren't even on the political spectrum, people whose main approach to life is religious or cultural or spiritual or intellectual or artistic. When you gather those people together, you can start to create a society that cares more about life. A group like Seamless Garment Network can bring those kinds of people together who really do care about life, as I said, from the embryo to the planet.
I would just invite them to look at all the issues of life and death, for the unborn and for future generations, for people alive now, for the poor. They're all connected. It's all one. All life is sacred. We are a true pro-life people. We are against nuclear weapons and death for the unborn, and people who are condemned to death on death row, and the poor of the third world who are condemned to death by our military aid and war. We want to be life for all people who are threatened with death. And I would just invite everybody to look at this broad spectrum of life and death, to see that it's all one, and to take a stand for the whole spectrum of life, and to say, we are for all humanity and against every form of death. And in this, we will truly be living out our callings as human beings. We'll truly be people who are for life.
The television networks will never show the photographs of fetuses after the abortion has taken place, because it's too gruesome. They'll show pictures of people on crack or on heroin who have died in a violent way, but not these. So there's some kind of, the only hope I have is there is some kind undertow in the society of queasiness, of concern that maybe this isn't a good thing to do. And that's maybe what seamless garment people can develop. I don't know.
If a person doubted whether it was right at this time to join the movement of the seamless garment, I would say, well, the most important point would be credibility. Whose life are you willing to take? Whose life would you say is less important than another life? In warfare, in abortion, in euthanasia, in capital punishment. If you can honestly make that decision and be addressed with it, well, that's your conscience. I can't see how anyone can make that choice.
The whole question is to know whether or not we shall develop faster than the rocket with a nuclear warhead. This is the wager of our generation. If we were to fail, it is better to have stood on the side of those who choose life than on the side of those who are destroyed.
So it's all of a piece. It's a horrifying piece. And yet most Americans think that they're being compassionate when they want to support the notion of abortion. Who wants these kids anyway? The kids don't have a chance to answer that question. And they feel they're compassionate when they, as they like to say, let go elderly people who are incompetent in a hospital, not recognizing, and this is why the disability rights groups are so much against that. The disability rights groups see ahead, as do I, all kinds of disabled people who can't speak for themselves being killed because they cost too much. They might live another 30 years. They don't contribute to society. As the Germans used to say, they are useless eaters. Now, a society that thinks in terms of useless eaters, or that it's too expensive to keep somebody alive, is a society that's going to slide deeper and deeper into this quicksand of death.
Whenever we come to our senses and accept as a people the seamless garment network and stop all the killing in all its forms and begin to learn to respect one another and to be nonviolent to one another, I think our world is just going to take on tremendous new potentials, and it's going to be like a flower that's blossoming. The capacity to end hunger, to give children a future, to create parks and land and schools and food and healthcare programs.
The image in my mind of the pregnant woman, of life within life, is so attractive to me that we realize that we all live in each other and with each other and for each other. Kind of solidarity of the human race based on the image of the woman carrying life. To me, that's so attractive. It's the human family as it was meant to be.
In thinking about the future, what our lives could be like, I feel today could be the beginning of that kind of future if William Neal Moore gets his day of execution, gets from the Board of Pardon and Parole. I would envision that could be the beginning of a real movement in respecting the lives of human beings. It would be a change, and we would see it. We would see the change in how working women are treated, how mothers are treated, how children are treated, how the elderly gets treated. And to me, the best thing would be that for my children, when they would become adults, the struggle would not be, for example, against capital punishment or something like that. They would be exploring how peaceful alternatives to eating meat or adopting a vegetarian lifestyle. I mean, those are the kinds of rights issues that I see for my children if we do our job in this generation.
We are the first generation since Genesis with the power to virtually destroy God's creation. So unless we really make a turnaround, unless we really destroy nuclear weaponry, unless we really respect all forms of human life, I think we may, in a generation, reach an abyss from which it will be hard to turn back.
A Georgia death row inmate had his death sentence commuted today to life in prison. William Moore's case is unusual because the state got pleas of mercy from as far away as Mother Teresa.
But this morning, the State Board of Pardons and Paroles voted unanimously to commute the death sentence to life. Channel 5's Sally Sears is in our newsroom now with the details. Sally?
After the death sentence was lifted, the audience began to sing the hymn, Amazing Grace. Billy Moore was just 30 hours from death in the electric chair. He will be leaving death. How sweet the sound that